Family Guy is one of my favorite adult animations I've ever watched, and whilst overall I can definitely name several cartoons I found more enjoyable, such as the likes of South Park, Gumball, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and others, there are very few cartoons that can measure up to the first few seasons of Family Guy. I would say the likes of the first 3 or 4. But why exactly do I say this? Well, to put it quite simply, Family Guy has changed a lot throughout the years it has been airing, and I sadly wouldn't quite say that it has been for the better. They went from, in their early seasons, having deep storytelling, great storylines, and lovable characters to basically destroying everything which they had built in the name of a few quick gags. If you look at their IMDb page, you can see clear evidence of this, with many of the recent seasons averaging around a 6, which many of their episodes being even lower than that. I have, and I kid you not, seen countless Family Guy episodes being rated below a 4. If we compare this to a show like South Park, who has released around the same amount of episodes, as well as being on air for around the same time, we can see that the average, I would say a high 7. So, what went wrong? Just how far have Family Guy fallen, and what has been going on through the heads of their creators and behind the scenes which have allowed Family Guy to fall so far? Well, let's find out. Family Guy aired its first episode all the way back on January 31st, 1999. The show was created by comedian Seth MacFarlane. The basic story of Family Guy is about a Rhode Island family in the town of Quahog who just go about their normal life and often find themselves in goofy shenanigans. What the fuck did I write that? The family consists of the father, Peter Griffin, your typical fun-loving, goofy, clumsy guy who isn't the brightest but ultimately means well and cares deeply for his family. We have Lois, the stay-at-home mom. She is the straight man to Peter, as she always is the one who has to pull him out of his stupidity, and is ultimately the one in the family who can connect best to the audience, as she is the most normal of the family. We have their 3 children, Meg, Chris, and Stewie. Meg is the teenage daughter who cares a lot about her family, and like Lois is one of the more normal characters in the show. She is depicted as being the child who gets bullied a lot in school and often is with her family a lot, which just brings their connection closer and helps the show and characters be more likable, and ultimately helps the show be more enjoyable. Boy, I sure hope they don't ruin this dynamic after like 4 seasons. Chris is the Griffin's second child. He is basically a mini Peter, being your lovable, funny, dumb character who is funny to laugh at mostly, but they don't really do much of him in the series, even later on. Stewie, who is the evil genius who wants to rule the world. However, this is juxtaposed with him simultaneously being a literal baby, which means that he has the same emotional and social skills as a baby, and ultimately can't really complete much destruction. I really like the way they portray Stewie in the earlier seasons. And finally, we have the talking family dog Brian, who is my favorite Family Guy character from these earlier seasons, since he has the most depth for him. He is the smartest, most social, he has the most deep character, and we see him face struggles with himself when he feels not good enough, among other things. This is all while he also faces being a talking dog in a human world, which I know sounds stupid, but it is played off so seriously that you feel for Brian. And these plots make for some of the best episodes in the entire series. For example, Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows, or Brian Portrait of a Dog, are some of the best episodes for not only Family Guy, but I would argue animation in general. To prove just how good early Family Guy was, let's look at one episode from what I would call the prime era of Family Guy and analyze it to give us a more clear view of what I exactly mean. Also, if you have come this far in the video and you're probably enjoying it, so go ahead and like and subscribe. You don't have to, obviously, but it does help a lot, so yeah, thank you. Brian Portrait of a Dog starts off with there being news of a heat wave sweeping through the town of Quahog. Peter comes home with the news of a dog show in the town with a cash prize of $500, which the family want to spend on an air conditioner to combat the heat wave that they are facing. And they of course want Brian to compete in the dog show. Brian, however, is very adamant about not competing in the show since he doesn't want to be treated like a typical dog and be ordered around all the time. However, after a lot of pleading from the family, Brian finally agrees to be part of the dog show. They go to the dog show and Brian starts having second thoughts once he sees all the dogs around him acting like wild animals, since, they are dogs. However, he goes through with it in the end. Brian completes the race around the track for the dog show very fast and to many applause. However, at the end, Peter puts a dog biscuit on Brian's nose, which he wants Brian to beg for, something that they obviously didn't rehearse since Peter knew Brian was most likely not going to be happy about this. This obviously makes Brian very mad, who quits the show out of dignity and the self-respect he has for himself. Brian and Peter argue throughout the car ride home, and Peter accuses Brian of not caring for or about the family, and this all culminates in Brian leaving the car in the middle of the road and heading away on his own. Brian is, however, stopped by the police and is ordered by the cop to lie down as the cop returns Brian back to his house since Brian is not wearing a leash, which is illegal. Where back home, Peter receives a $10 fine. More drama between Brian and Peter unfolds in the kitchen the next morning, where Brian claims after a lot of arguing between the two that things can never return to how they used to be. This is also where we learn of Brian's backstory as a stray dog before Peter took him in. Brian finally leaves the house again, and gets even more discriminated by the places which he goes into for being a dog, including restaurants where he gets kicked out, and even corner shops where he is nearly pointed a gun at. The family tries replacing Brian with a cat, but slowly come to realize that it is just not the same without having Brian around.
Peter, why don't you just admit you miss Brian?
You're right, Lois. Who am I kidding? His family needs Brian. I need him. God, I hate this freaking kid.
This prompts Peter, who has been very stubborn throughout all of this, to finally go look for Brian, where he finds Brian out on the street, back to being a stray with a shaggy beard among other things, just like he was before Peter had taken him in. However, before Peter can get to Brian, Brian gets arrested by the police, where he then later gets sentenced to lethal injection, seemingly for biting people on the street, which we see. However, it is never fully explained why. Peter comes through for Brian in the end, where we see Peter manages to get Brian's case appealed to the court, and in the hearing he finally apologizes to Brian, and they finally let Brian go, and that's where the episode ends, with Brian finally being reunited with the Griffins, and things finally being settled between him and Peter at last. Brian Portrait of a Dog is a fantastic episode for many reasons. Firstly, it gives us a clearer look at the struggles which Brian faces for being a smart individual with consciousness and human level intelligence. However, he is a dog, of course, so that means he's unfairly treated a lot of the time. It is very interesting to see him have to fight through this, and it is paced and told very well. Secondly, we can see the traits of all the different family members, namely Peter, being played to such perfection, with his stupidity ultimately being what caused the drama which unfolded, as well as his stubbornness being what escalated it. However, the love he feels towards his family, namely Brian in this case, does power through in the end, and we are all left with a very good and satisfactory conclusion. And finally, the characters are very likable, since we can relate to their struggles and practically everyone comes off as well-meaning and sympathetic. Well, except Stewie, but he's a baby, so that's to be expected. Ultimately, this episode is amazing, and I highly recommend watching it if you have not already. Now let's compare that to a more modern episode of Family Guy, one I haven't seen yet, and I guess technically don't know even if it's gonna be any bad, but let's just say my expectations are pretty low. Here from season 21, episode 13, the latest episode to date in the series. Single white dad starts off with Meg setting up a huge domino line very carefully just for Peter to sit on it while being fully aware of everything. What a nice guy. He reveals to Chris, who's with him, that he found his old Nintendo NES and they play Donkey Kong. Chris hates the game, and this is followed by some boomer humor about how kids these days don't like games without any good graphics, open world, or microtransactions, and this ends up with Chris claiming he could literally build Donkey Kong on top of their house. So they build the Donkey Kong on top of their house. And this ends up with Lois breaking her foot. She has to get a cast, and this means that she can't go out of bed for a whole week, which means that Peter has to take care of the kids for the entire week, which he hates because, as he clearly states, he absolutely hates his kids. This isn't me over-exaggerating or anything, he really hates his kids, he's very clear about this. Peter ends up with only Stewie after he takes all the kids out for breakfast since he can't cook breakfast, and ends up making Chris and Meg rob stores for food. Again, what a nice guy. Peter arrives at a coffee shop with Stewie where everyone sees him as a super dad for caring alone for Stewie. He then also pretends that his wife, Lois, is dead in order to get free stuff from the coffee shop and ultimately other places as well. Brian tries to get with Lois while she's laying in bed, and not only does Lois reject him, she beats the fucking shit out of him as well and abuses him in several ways. Jesus fucking Christ. Peter continues taking care of Stewie in a playground where this new woman comes up and she wants to organize a play date with. Oh, this episode fucking sucks, man. Yeah, this episode sucks hard. Not only are the characters super unlikable nowadays, and I mean seriously, how the hell are old Peter and this new Peter even the same character? The plot is also incredibly boring and it's just not funny at all. So I think that we can safely conclude that this episode sucked, and I have seen several more episodes from modern So I think we can safely conclude that this episode sucked, and I have seen several more episodes from the modern era of Family Guy, including more episodes from this very season, and I want to clearly state that it sucks. So yeah, we can safely conclude that modern Family Guy isn't really all that good. But that begs the question of, well, why? I think the downfall of Family Guy has occurred for many reasons. These include, but are not limited to, the fact that Family Guy has been on the air for so long that I honestly think that the producers and writers are just simply tired of the show at this point, burned out, can't come up with any new fresh ideas, and on the same wavelength, I think they just don't care anymore. Seth MacFarlane, who is the creator of Family Guy, barely even works with the show anymore, and I think this means that there is much less heart put into the show anymore. Also, they have ruined a lot of the characters and taken away a lot of what made the show good, and this is all simply put just for a few gags. They made Meg a punching bag just for the fun of it, but this has destroyed not only her character but also Peter and Lois's, as they now just look like terrible parents, abusive, and they don't care about their kids, and they don't really try to hide this about Peter. Also, Brian is just now a megalomaniac who's extremely unlikable. Stewie is overpowered to the point of not even being funny anymore, among other things. Simply put, Family Guy was ruined because of the people behind the show being lazy, and they didn't want to focus on the storytelling anymore, which was what made the show so great in the first place. But with that out of the way, subscribe, like, and I have a really big video coming up, so subscribe if you want to see it. I promise you, you do not want to miss it, and I'll see you in a bit.